Our first stop as we look at the flow of food will be with purchasing and receiving. This is a lot of information, but much of it is fairly common sense. We have heard over and over in this course so far that the key to safe purchasing is to buy from a reputable vendor. What this means is that the vendor has been inspected and is in compliance with all the local, state, and federal laws. Inspection reports should be available, which can be from the USDA, the FDA, or a third-party inspector, depending on what type of food the vendor is selling. These inspection reports should verify good manufacturing practices, known as GMPs. The GMPs are the FDA's minimum sanitation and processing requirements for producing safe food. These good manufacturing practices describe the methods, equipment, facilities, and controls that were used to process the food. Not only the suppliers, but all of their sources are subject to GMP inspections. These inspections ensure that the food continues to be safe as it moves from supplier to supplier. This image illustrates this well. Food is inspected multiple times as it moves from production to processing onto distribution. From there, it comes into food preparation establishments like restaurants, hospitals, and homes, where final preparation is made for serving it to people to eat. In this lesson, we will look at some of the general inspection guidelines for receiving food that has been delivered to a food service business. We'll focus on checking product temperatures for abuse, making sure that the packaging is intact, checking the documentation that what we ordered is what we received, and finally, the quality of the food items that we have received. It is important that we have enough trained staff on hand to promptly receive, inspect, and store the food when it arrives. These staff members need to be trained and authorized to accept, reject, and sign for these deliveries based on the procedures that we have in place for rejecting deliveries that don't meet standards. We need to ensure that deliveries are inspected immediately and that steps are taken to correct any mistakes immediately. From there, all products must be stored correctly as soon as possible. To do all of this safely and efficiently, the receiving area needs to be clean and well lit. Most deliveries happen during a less busy time during the day, such as early morning. Your book also talks about key drop deliveries. These are deliveries that happen when no one is present at the business to accept the orders, often overnight. For key drop deliveries, the supplier is given after-hours access to the operation to deliver the orders. Deliveries must meet the following criteria. They have to have been inspected upon arrival at the operation, they have to be from an approved source, and they have to be placed in the correct storage location to maintain the required temperature. They also must be protected from contamination in storage, and they cannot be contaminated when delivered. The product must be honestly presented when it is delivered. So what does the process look like for rejecting a shipment or part of a shipment? The packaging of food and non-food items should be intact and clean. It should protect the food and the food contact surfaces from contamination. One example would be finding signs of thawing or refreezing. Evidence of this might be the product contains a block of ice or liquid, water stains on the box or packaging, and large ice crystals on packaging or the product itself. Poor food quality can be a sign that the food has been time temperature abused and therefore may be unsafe. When you must reject a shipment, you should set the rejected product aside. Tell the delivery person exactly what is wrong with the product and get a signed adjustment or credit slip from the delivery person. You would then log the incident on the invoice or receiving document. You would also reject items where the packaging has tears, holes, or punctures. This would include rejecting cans with swollen ends, rust, or dents. Also rejecting broken cartons or seals or dirty wrappers. You would reject packaging where there are leaks, dampness, or water stains, or signs of pests or pest damage, or expired codes or use-by dates. When you move on to inspecting product quality, you'll reject based on appearance, texture, and odor. In general, if it has an abnormal color or it has an abnormal or unpleasant odor, you would reject it. Food items you have received may sometimes be recalled by the manufacturer. This may happen when food contamination is confirmed or suspected. It can also occur when items have been mislabeled or misbranded. Often, food is recalled when food allergens have not been identified on the label. Most vendors will notify you of the recall. However, you should also monitor recall notifications made by the FDA and the USDA. When something is recalled, we need to identify the recalled food items by matching information from the recall notice to the item. This may include the manufacturer's ID, the time the item was manufactured, and the item's use-by date. We would remove the item from inventory and place it in a secure and appropriate location. That may be a cooler or a dry storage area. The recall item must be stored separately from food, utensils, equipment, linens, and single-use items. It is important to label recalled items in a way that will prevent them from being placed back in inventory. Some operations do this by including a do not use or do not discard label on recalled food items. We also must inform the staff not to use the product. We refer to the vendor's notification or recall notice for what to do with the item. For example, you may be instructed to throw it out or to return it to the vendor. Let's take a quick look at the difference between inspection and grading of food products. Inspections are conducted by the USDA and are required for all poultry, meats, and for eggs in any form, whether they're sold as liquid, frozen, or dehydrated eggs. Grading is voluntary, but it is frequently performed on poultry, meat, and eggs. This is done more as a marketing technique or for a selling point. It has nothing to do with safety. Now we'll look at the nitty-gritty information on criteria for deliveries of food that need to be monitored for time, temperature, abuse. General guidelines for temperatures when we are receiving food deliveries are that cold TCS food must be at 41 degrees or lower, with a few exceptions that we'll talk about later, and hot TCS foods must be received at 135 degrees or higher. And if a food is received frozen, it must be frozen solid. We test this in meat, poultry, and fish by inserting a thermometer probe into the thickest part of the food. We don't need to test every single item of food, but we would check several randomly. For food that arrives in packages, we open several of the packages and insert the thermometer stem or probe into the food without touching the container. Some types of packaging require special handling. These include reduced oxygen packaging, modified atmospheric packaging, and sous vide, which are ROP foods that are designed to be cooked or reheated in sealed pouches. To take the temperature for these types of foods, we would insert the stem of the thermometer or probe between two packages, or fold the packaging around the thermometer or probe. If the temperature is correct, the other signs to determine whether or not to reject a delivery of meat are pretty obvious. Things are okay when the texture is firm and springs back, there's no odor, and the packaging is clean and intact. We would reject an order where the texture is slimy, sticky, or dry, it has a sour odor, or the packaging is broken, dirty, or torn. For poultry, we're looking for no discoloration and a texture that is firm and springs back when touched. There should be no odor, and the packages should arrive on crushed, self-draining ice. We would not want to see dark wingtips or purple-green color around the neck. The texture would be sticky under the wings or around the joints. If the odor was abnormal or unpleasant, we would reject the order. In general, for meat, fish, or poultry, if it is slimy, sticky, or dry, or it has soft flesh that leaves an imprint when touched, we would reject it. Given what we know about the foodborne illnesses that can result from fish and shellfish, receiving these requires very special care. When receiving shucked shellfish, we can receive them at 45 degrees or lower, but we must cool them to 41 or lower within 4 hours. We can receive live shellfish, such as oysters, mussels, clams, and scallops, at air temperatures of 45 degrees, or internal temperatures no greater than 50 degrees. Once we have received them, the shellfish must be cooled to 41 degrees or lower within 4 hours. In addition, live shellfish must be received with shell stock identification tags. We would reject shellfish if they have broken shells, are very muddy, or if they're dead. This is an example of a shell stock identification tag. These tags must remain attached to the delivery container until all the shellfish have been used, and employees must record on the tags the date that the last shellfish was sold or served from that container. Food service operators must keep these tags on file for 90 days from the recorded last date of the shellfish being sold. There are other required documents related to fish that will be eaten raw or partially cooked, and for farm-raised fish. For fish that will be raw or partially cooked, documentation must show that the fish was correctly frozen before it was received, and these documents must be kept for 90 days from the sale of the fish. For farm-raised fish, there must be documentation stating that the fish was raised to FDA standards, and these documents are also kept for 90 days from the sale of the fish. We know that salmonella and other bacteria can be associated with eggs, so eggs need to be carefully inspected before they are accepted for delivery. The eggs must be clean and unbroken, and shell eggs must be received at an air temperature of 45 degrees or lower. They can be stored at 45 degrees. We would reject eggs that have a sulfur smell or an off odor, or where the shells are dirty or cracked. Bacillus cereus, Listeria, and Salmonella are all bacteria that are associated with milk and other dairy products. Milk can be received at 45 degrees or lower, and then we need to cool the milk to 41 degrees or lower within 4 hours. The milk must be pasteurized and comply with USDA Grade A standards. We would reject any milk that is sour, bitter, or has a moldy taste, an off odor, or an expired date. We would reject any butter that is sour, bitter, or has a moldy taste, or has an uneven color, a too soft texture, or contains foreign objects. We would reject cheese that has an abnormal flavor or texture, an uneven color, unnatural mold, or unclean or broken rind. When we receive sliced melons, cut tomatoes, and cut leafy greens, it must be received at 41 degrees or lower. We would reject produce if it shows signs of spoilage, such as mold, insect eggs or egg cases, dull color or discoloration, wilting, mushiness, or an unpleasant odor or taste. So receiving and inspecting are critical elements in the flow of food. A failure to stop contaminated food from entering your door opens the way for foodborne illness to enter your operation and potentially harm your workers and your customers.